QSO Today, episode 214, Bernie McClenny W3UR. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers for every level of amateur radio operator, and by QRP Labs, makers of the QCX single-band transceiver kit. Please support the QSO Today podcast by supporting these fine sponsors. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth for Z1UG, your host. As an 11-year-old, watching his dad put pins in a world map while working DX, Bernie McClenny W3UR became hooked on ham radio and working his own DX. My guest today has made working DX not only his hobby, but his profession as well. Bernie is the publisher of the Daily DX, an email newsletter, and author of the monthly QST Magazine column How's DX. We will get into W3UR's ham radio story and his unusual collaboration with his neighbor in this QSO Today. W3UR, this is Eric for Z1UG. Are you there, Bernie?
Hi, Eric for Z1UG. This is W3UR. Good day.
Bernie, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, it started when I was about 11 years old. My dad came home one night from work. He had learned about an amateur radio class taking place at the local community college. At that time, I and my dad were both active, believe it or not, on CB radio. We were interested in that. Dad came home and said, "I'd like to take a course in amateur radio. Would you like to come with me?" And I said, "Sure." I went to the class. I came home. After the class, Dad asked, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "Nah, this isn't for me." The theory is what really kind of scared me. Dad went on to get his license. He got his license sometime in 1976. And immediately he began working stations from all over the world. And he had a map on his wall, like many hams. And this one, he put pins in. One color meant he had worked or talked to a station from that country. Another color meant that he had confirmed it with a QSL card. I saw that map up on the wall and said, "Hey, I want to do that." And so this was probably a year later, I studied for the test. I built a Heathkit oscillator and I learned the code immediately. That was not a problem at all. The theory was a whole lot harder. Dad was a manager basically for a hardware company, and he didn't have the background that many hams have with electronics and whatnot. So it was very difficult for both of us on the electronic side, but the Morse code for me was no problem.
What a remarkable way to keep track of your countries with a pin in the map. I think that's terrific. You were what then, age 12 when you got your first license?
I was 13 years old. It was September 1977. In fact, my dad was there for my first QSO. He had an HW101. It was on 15 meters. I called CQ, and I was just as nervous as could be. In fact, at one point, I was even crying in the middle of the QSO. I was very nervous, and Dad kind of sort of was there in the background, held my hand, if you will, during the QSO. After the QSO, I said, "Well, let's do another one," and I did, and that's kind of how I got started with my first QSO.
Now, was this the novice license that you had, and was this first QSO on 15 meter CW?
Yes, that's correct. I was a novice, and 15 meter CW is where most of the activity was at that time.
Did the HW101 then serve as your rig? And by this time, your father probably had gone beyond the novice. That's why he had the HW101?
Yes. And that actually was his first radio. He got his novice and then his general. He was WB3CZK. Actually, his first license was WN3CZK. And he was a general at that point. We traded that radio in shortly after I got my license, and we got one of the Ten-Tech radios, the Triton 4, I believe is what it was.
And because he was a general class operator, you could use the VFO as a novice?
Yes. Well, actually, that the HW101 had it was a transceiver, the 10 Tech Triton 4 also. You just transmit right where you were listening, and we didn't operate split very often.
Now, did you have other Elmers or mentors that helped you and your dad along in ham radio?
I joined the Potomac Valley Radio Club. It's a contesting club, but at that point, really didn't have any Elmers. I guess if anything, N3GB, George Baltz, he was a neighbor of mine. I would occasionally go to his house and learn some things from him. I've operated some of the contests with him. I would say at that point, George N3GB and my dad were my only Elmers at that point.
Did the Potomac Valley Contesting Club become an important support for you as a teenager in ham radio? Were you involved in their field days and their regular events?
Well, I was mostly a DXer. I did do field day one time with them. They really enjoyed doing field day for a long time. I did one operation in the early 80s, just after, I became an adult and moved out of the house. But more so on the contesting side is where I got my support. I operated multi-multis and multi-singles and single-op at a number of different locations. I got my general, I'm going to say, I think it was 1981. So, yeah, that's at that point, I was doing a lot of contesting, mostly to get new DX countries. That's really what my interest is. But I enjoy contesting also.
So you were actually quite satisfied to be a novice for, that 4 years with the operating that you were doing.
Yeah, it actually was 3 years, I think. At that time, when I first got licensed, you could only have your novice for 2 years, and if you didn't upgrade, you lost your license. Well, thankfully, the FCC changed the rules so you could renew, and I did renew my license once. I had tried a number of times to get my general. Like I said, the theory was very difficult for me, and my dad didn't have a electronics background. In fact, one day I snuck out of school, and I was probably 16 years old. I drove up to Baltimore to take my test, hoping that I would pass. I did not, but the next time, with my parents' permission and not, I did pass in, I want to say it was somewhere around January or February of, I think it was 80 or 81. I'm not positive. It's been so long.
Now, did ham radio play a part in the choices that you made for your education and career?
No, I would have to say probably not. When I was 16, I took my dad's car and went up to the post office and tried to impress a young lady who had just gotten off the school bus, driving way too fast for that road and for the wet conditions. And I crashed my car into someone's tree. When I did that and my dad found out, he was obviously rather ticked off, and he said, "Son, you're going to work. I've set up an interview with you with a man over at one of our other stores, and you're going to go interview, and you're going to go to work, and you're going to pay for this." And I did, and I learned an important lesson. But I also stayed with that company for 15 years. It was a mom and pop hardware store. I worked both in the store itself for 7.5 years, got up to an assistant manager position, and then transferred down to the corporate headquarters where I worked in the buying and advertising department for another 7.5 years. I saw the writing on the wall that a competitor came into town, and I knew it wasn't going to be long before they were going to be closing the doors. So I left Heckinger. That was the name of the company. And before I did that, I began to speak to a friend of mine who I'd known since I was a kid, and actually met for the first time down at the Washington FCC, KE3Q. At the time, he was WA3DSD, Rich Boyd. So I've been talking to Rich. He's kind of like one of these entrepreneur guys. He has lots of great ideas with startups, and we started talking, and we came up with this idea for the Daily DX. In fact, he was the one that came up with the name, the Daily DX. And I started the Daily DX on March 17th, St. Patty's Day, 1997. So to answer your question, no, it really didn't. And I kind of started this from out of not knowing what to do next. Although I will say that the Hechinger company taught me a lot of good business practices. They had a good ethic, a work ethic, and I learned a lot. And a lot of my administrative skills came from working and learning at Hechinger.
Well, we'll get back to the Daily DX in just a minute. Can you tell me what's your current rig?
I have an Elecraft K3, and I'm very happy with it.
You mentioned to me that you happen to be kind of out in the sticks. Do you have a rather fancy antenna arrangement out there?
I'm very fortunate. I have 3 acres. My next door neighbor is W3LPL, literally my next door neighbor. He's just over 600 feet away. He called me on the phone about 25 years ago and said, hey, the guy next door is in a hurry to move. He knew we were looking for a bigger house. And so we moved here 25 years ago this month. And he's got 8 towers, monobanders on 10 through 40, wires and verticals on the low bands. So there's no really need for me to have any. I do have 3 towers in my backyard. 2 of them are Frank's. It's part of the Foursquare. My one tower is 60 feet high, and it has a 7-element 6-meter beam that I use during the E-skip season.
So do you have a big piece of hard line or something like that goes from your house out to Frank's switching shed?
I do, yes. When I moved here, I put up the tower, and Frank gave me a 2,600-foot spool of 7/8 hard line. It runs from I have 3 runs that run from my house to his patch panel. And so he can patch me into any antenna just about any time, other than the 4 major DX contests, the ARRLs and the CQ Worldwide. So if I want to get on, I can get on.
And if you want to work the contest, you can walk over to Frank's house or sit
Exactly.
it out, right?
Yep, that's what I do. Yeah,
well, that's pretty cool. And that's an amazing arrangement, too. How about that?
Yeah, we've been friends for a long time, and he's at this point, I would have to say he is my contesting and antenna Elmer for sure.
Well, that's really cool. Okay, so Frank Donovan was our guest in episode 122 of the QSO Today podcast. Well, that's very clever. Bernie, what is your favorite operating mode?
I would have to say hands down CW would be my favorite mode.
And with the sunspot cycle in its lowest point, are you still working CW, or do you work any of the digital modes as well?
I do FT8 only because it's new and there's a lot of activity there. Not a big fan of it, but there's parts of it I like and parts that I don't like. But for the most part, I stick to CW, and at this part of the sunspot cycle, I'm kind of happy because that gives me a chance to work new band countries on 80 and 160 meters.
Oh, yeah, that's right, because those bands are not dependent necessarily on the sunspot cycle. So are you working then primarily in the evenings?
I'm at a point where I don't need much on the low bands, or for that matter, I've got all the countries worked mixed. All the countries worked on sideband. I'm missing P5 on CW, and there's not much I need on any of the bands, to be honest with you. It's pretty much got to be a DXpedition or just a really, really lucky opening to Southeast Asia on 80 or 160 meters. There's not much I need there. So my operating time is usually going to be right at sunrise or right at sunset looking on the low bands.
So what you're missing is North Korea.
Yes, on CW.
On CW.
I have it on phone and RIDI.
I understand the story that you told earlier about your dad putting the pins on the map. Is that really what hooked you onto DX, and that's kept you there ever since?
Yeah, I'd have to say that's what got me started looking at it. But the thrill of working a new one is even today, it's still exciting to work a new one. Whether it's a new band country, an all-time new one, for example, the Z6 was the most recent one, and and my other to keep me interested, I also chase the IOTA award, and I think there's like 1,200 different islands for the IOTA award. When I work a new one of those, I get excited about that too. So I just like the thrill of the chase, I guess.
Oh, that's amazing. How do you keep track of them?
I used logging software, which I think everybody should use some form of logging software. I wish that I had started off my ham career with a computer. I have tons of paper logs, and it's hard to go back through them and find the QSOs. Once you're trying to get these awards, it's hard without looking them up on the computer. But I use DX for Win. I've been a long time loyal supporter of that program. I'm very happy with it.
Win is the software?
It's called DX4 Win. DX number 4 WIN.
DX4 Win.
Correct. It's written by KK4HD Paul.
Now, does it work with Frank's automation at all? Are you connected to his automation?
No. There's no. It's just the antennas that I have access to. I don't have access to the rotors. I do occasionally. I have a band switch, or excuse me, a antenna switch for the Foursquare, which is actually in my backyard. On 160, I can switch between the 4 different positions: northeast, southeast, southwest, northwest. That's the only thing I can switch.
But if you want to do something on 15 meters, you can call Frank and tell him to point it in a direction.
Correct. And with 3 antennas, if I want 15 meters, I can put the stack tower on Japan. I can use the stacks that are fixed on Europe, and then the high antenna, I could put it at pointed at ZS. I could have 3 antennas on one band on my switching system that I have in the shack.
Now, as I recall, when I interviewed Frank, he had said that he's also listening when he's not contesting. His stations are listening and feeding DX clusters. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. He has a system set up that basically it's a skimmer that he has, and then he has a program that's written that will pick off certain calls that are of interest to DXers, and it's just a system that he has set up. If one station in the U.S. hears it, and then any other station hears it to confirm, yes, that this is the station and he's really on this frequency, then if it's on his list, it'll go out.
Well, that's pretty cool. So you've actually pursued just about every DX award, and you have most of them?
Yeah, I most of them I have. I have 5-band DXCC. I have 5-band worked all zone. I have worked all zone on 160 meters, DXCC on 6 meters, VUCC on 6 meters, IOTA, WPX awards. Yeah, I enjoy doing it.
What's the most difficult award to achieve as a DXer?
I would have to say probably worked all zones on 160 meters. That's probably the most difficult. Followed closely behind for the 5-band WAZ program. You've got to have a whole sunspot cycle in you pretty much to work that one. You've got to be on for at least 11 years to get that one.
What are zones? I've actually never heard of worked all zones.
Well, the CQ magazine has an award called the Worked All Zones Award. There's 40 zones, 40 CQ zones. Here in the U.S., there's 3 for California, the West Coast, 4 for the central parts in Texas, and 5, which is where I am, CQ Zone 5, and that's the East Coast.
Okay, so I'll put a link to that in the show notes pages for people that also, like me, want to see what a zone map looks like.
Okay, yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you started the DX Bulletin along with Rich Boyd, WA3BSD, as an entrepreneurial endeavor. What need other than perhaps an income did creating the Daily DX fulfill for you?
Well, for me, it was kind of twofold. I needed a job, number one, but number two, it got me doing something that I love, the hobby that I love, and the part of the hobby that I really love, which is DXing. I got to find out about the expeditions long before the public got to know about them.
And now this message from MyCom America. Heard it, worked it, logged it. I just looked at the amateur radio contest schedule through the end of the year. It appears that you could be busy just about every day, including the CQ Worldwide and other contests coming up. Prepare yourself for the contest season by upgrading your ham station with the latest rigs from ICOM America. According to Dr. Ulrich Rohde, N1UL, my guest in episode 208, the IC7851 is the best HF transceiver on the market today. It has the competitive edge that you've been looking for. Raise the bar and hear what others cannot with this flagship HF and 50 MHz transceiver. This is due to ICOM engineers focusing on a new local oscillator design that drastically reduces phase noise. This noise reduction and purity of LO results in an RMDR of 110 dB, allowing you to hear the extremely weak signals, making the IC7851 the perfect rig for making contacts at the bottom of the sunspot cycle. In addition, this fine rig has crystal clear LO design, spectrum scope, dual receivers, and a digital voice recorder. The IC7610 is the SDR every ham wants and just in time for contest season. This high-performance SDR has the ability to pick out the faintest signals even in the presence of stronger adjacent signals. The new ICOM IC7610 is a direct sampling software-defined radio, or SDR, that will change the world's definition of an SDR transceiver. Additional features include RF direct sampling system, 110 RMDR, independent dual receivers, and dual digicell. The IC7300 has changed the way that an entry-level HF transceiver is designed and has set a new standard. This rig is a high-performance, innovative HF transceiver with a compact design that will far exceed your expectations. It includes RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, a large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, real-time spectrum scope, internal antenna tuner, and an SD memory card slot. No matter which ICOM rig you choose for this contest season, you'll be a winner. Be sure to check out these fine rigs at www.icomamerica.com, and when you finally go to make your ICOM purchase, be sure to tell the dealer that you heard it here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO. Now, it seems to me to create any kind of daily email, and I think email was relatively new, I would think, in 1997. I'm trying to remember back. I think email was dial-up in 1997.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so you're a pioneer then in creating a daily email anything, I think, newsletter. Because I remember there were a lot of printed newsletters you could subscribe to in those days that you'd get, like the Kiplinger Report. But creating a daily email newsletter was a new thing, and especially in ham radio. What was your source of content for a daily newsletter?
Well, when I started off, it was very difficult because I didn't have a whole lot of contacts. I started off with 100 guys, and I said, look, and they were close friends and some not so close, but guys that I respected that were in the DX and contesting community. And I said, look, I'm thinking about doing this, and I'm going to give this to you for the first two weeks, and I want to see what your thoughts are as to how this is going to play out. I did a lot of search on the internet for information. I'd say for the first probably 3 to 5 years, a lot of the stuff I was getting on my own. I had worked out some deals with some of the other DX bulletins at the time for an exchange program, which is kind of how they work anyway. And I dug really hard for items. I emailed people. And that was my main source of information, emailing people, asking them questions. Where are you going? When are you going? That kind of stuff. And over the years, I've developed a huge network of people that are sources, and that's kind of how I got it going.
Yeah, 21 years later, yeah, you're still publishing. Now, it's my understanding that you also have is it a weekly or monthly DX magazine too?
I have a weekly publication, and that started about 3 years later. When I was showing up at Hamfests and some of the DX conventions, guys were always saying, "Hey, the daily DX is great, but it's way too much for a working guy like me. Can you do a weekly publication?" And at first, I was like, "There's no way I'm going to start that thing up from the ground up." I just said, "Yeah, I'll have. It's something I'll have to consider." Well, a friend of mine, WB2YQH, had the 599 report. He had been doing it for years, and he was getting ready to get out of the business. And he basically said, "Hey, would you like to buy my list?" And after a little bit of negotiations and talking to some friends that I look up to, they thought it was a good idea, and so we started the weekly DX. I bought his mailing list and quickly converted it from it was just in those days where most of the subscriptions, or probably 60%, were still on paper being mailed, and about 40%, I would say, were electronic in the PDF format. After about 8 months of mailing out stuff, I decided right then and there, probably even before that, I just cannot continue to mail out the weekly DX. It's just not a good idea. Couldn't make money at it. I mean, you'd be paying the post office most of your money. So I converted it over to strictly to PDF, and I think we probably only lost maybe 5 or 6 paper subscribers.
Now, the Daily DX, is that also delivered in PDF format?
No, that's straight ASCII text to make it very simple. It's like some of the other DX newsletter formats, like you would get the ARRL or 425 DX or OPDX or any of the other ones. It's just straight ASCII text.
Can you say how many hams read the Daily DX?
Well, that's one of the more difficult questions. I'd prefer not to answer it directly, but I'll say it's not enough for my wife to retire, and it's enough for me to keep going. Let's just keep it at that.
I understand that absolutely, completely, doing the QSO Today podcast. But I do a weekly podcast, and you do a daily report. Have you missed a day in 21 years? And how do you keep it going? Do you now have a staff that helps you, or do you have an editor or contributing editors?
Well, when you say daily, and this has been from the very get-go, it is actually Monday through Friday. Although if anything special comes up over the weekend, if an announcement comes up, or if there's a de-expedition going on and they're sending out updates and alerts and that kind of stuff, I'll send them out. But I had to draw the line somewhere. It did take up a lot of time. And I've kind of condensed it down over 21 years. You can figure out where the shortcuts are. But it is Monday through Friday, and you're going to have to ask me the question again.
I'm thinking the Daily DX, even Monday through Friday, is an amazing commitment, which means that somehow it has to go out, whether you're traveling to ham radio conventions or on vacation or, visiting family. How do you keep it going? And do you have staff now that actually helps you to make sure that, it does go out every day?
Okay. So yeah, I've probably only missed for my schedule, maybe 5 days that I've, just have not been able to do it for health reasons. There have been a few, family emergencies over time. And thankfully, the subscribers, they know that I've got a life outside of ham radio. So they're pretty forgiving, but I like to give them what they paid for, to be quite honest with you. I do have Rich, KE3Q. He does every Monday issue, And the reason he does the Monday issue is because there's a lot of information that happens over the weekend, and I'm preparing to do the weekly DX on Monday and Sunday. So he has never turned me down. I do pay him. It's not as much as he would like, and it's not as much as I would like, but it's as much as I can afford to do, quite honestly. It's a lot of work, and like I said, we've only missed a few days for family emergencies over the last 21 years.
What an amazing commitment. Has social media, such as Facebook and Twitter, replaced the Daily DX and changed the way you deliver the content to your audience?
No, if anything, I would say it's actually helped because there are websites that are out there. There are Twitter accounts, that I monitor, and I'm able to keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on. Maybe even a little better. Sometimes it's overwhelming how much information is out there, depending on the day.
You're also the editor of the QST column, How's DX? Do you emphasize something in the QST column that makes it different DX reading than the other places where people are looking for DX information?
Well, it's a wide variety of hams that read the QST magazine. There's over 170,000 subscribers to QST Magazine. And it's, from beginning DXers to never DXed before in their life to the top of the honor roll guys that have been doing it all their lives. So I kind of mix it up a lot, just depending on what's going on. The other thing is you have to be aware of is it's a 2-month out deadline before. So whatever. Let me start over again.
No, your deadline is 2 months before it actually prints and gets mailed
correct.
out. Right?
Correct. It's a 2-month deadline. So you have to have the information if you're going to announce something, 8 weeks out, at least at a minimum, before it actually goes to press.
Now, do you editorialize in your column? Do you post an opinion, talk about either how things are going, how things are conducted, how's DX?
For the most part, no, I do not.
So with an 8-week lead time to publishing your column in How's DX, is there a secret sauce that you add to the column in order to make it seem fresh, even though it's 2 months old?
Well, one of the things that I try to do is to make it to the point where people who have never DX'd before are going to read the column and they're going to realize how easy it is to work some of these stations and to plan in advance. So I try to make it as easy as possible for the new guys, but yet at the same time, not dumb it down for the old timers who are, some of them are looking for their DX information there also.
Do you have to have a big antenna array like the one that you're plugged into in order to work DX?
No, not at all. I've DX'd from my first probably 250 to 300 countries were worked with a 3-element tri-bander at less than 40 feet above the ground, wires. It can be done.
Well, I think we live in an age now of antenna modeling. So one of the episodes that precedes you discusses the way that antennas are designed and made now. So it seems to me that even the simplest wire beam now can be used for DX and can be made quite cheaply.
Yes, and also the other thing is just guys getting on the air, working stations. I'd say just practice for the new guys that are trying to work DX, and don't be afraid to get in there and call a station. It's a lot of it is the tenacity and the want behind the microphone or the key of the future DXers. You just have to keep trying.
Now, do you find that the bands are dead? I once had somebody tell me that, and unfortunately, we're doing episode 214, So in 214 episodes, I can't remember exactly who said it, but that the bands appear dead unless you start calling CQ, and that a lot of people are listening and not calling CQ. Is that your experience?
Yeah, I would have to say yes. And also, a lot of guys now have kind of migrated to FT8, and you can see on some of the websites that show where these stations are working each other. You can see the band is open. It's just that there's nobody on CW or sideband.
Now, I haven't looked at FT8 logs yet, or even the FT8 website. Sorry, listeners. Does it give you the signal level that is that's receiving your signal on FT8?
Yes, it does.
Can you use an FT8 report as a potential CW beacon?
Yeah, I'm not an expert at it, but from talking to my neighbor Frank, W3LPL, he thinks that right around minus 20 dB is about where is about the breaking point for a CW station. Anything below that, you're probably not going to hear on CW, but anything above that you would.
So that would give you an indication that if you got out there and started calling CQ on CW, that perhaps if you're not below minus 20 dB at the receiving point, maybe somebody will come back to you.
Yeah, it's possible. The main thing is to just try it. And also, I think on weekends, when there's contests, you can see that the bands are open most of the time. I mean, I know we're we're heading towards the bottom of the sunspot cycle, but the bands are still okay. You just have to know when and where to be.
Like everything else, it just takes practice.
Exactly.
So you can master any band. I mean, at this point, you had said earlier that you're working on the 160 meters. If you spend enough time in a band, do you think you can become the master of it?
Well, I don't know about the master of it, but you've got a pretty good idea of what's going on as time goes on. The more you do something, the better you're going to become at it.
Right. So don't be discouraged if you're not making contacts right away in whatever band you've decided to choose. Do you have any advice for people that want to be DXers in HOA type developments where maybe they can't have visible antennas?
I guess my recommendation would be to have some kind of a remote station, whether you have your own or you belong to a group, with remote ham, something like that. That's one of the things that this remote ham is really a great experience for those guys that are in HOAs or have locations that are susceptible to heavy QRM. You can at least find a location and build a station outside your city limits. So that I'd say a remote ham station would probably be a good idea.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I'm actually thinking of something along the same lines. And if you've got enough friends that'll help spread the cost, then it could be quite a thing. Especially if you can get out of the noise. Anybody that does soda or something like that appreciates how clean the bands can be if you get out of the city.
Right, exactly. Also, I think for retirees that are living in retirement communities, it's also a great way for them to get on the air and to keep the bands alive with stations.
If they can't have an amateur radio club in their retirement home.
Right, exactly.
And now this message from QRP Labs. After watching a video interview with Hans Summers, G0UPL, owner and chief designer of QRP Labs and its fine array of kit products for ham radio, at the 2018 Yoda Summer event in South Africa, I am convinced that QRP Labs will be one of the most exciting ham radio electronic kit destinations this year. In the video, Hans describes his approach to transceiver design, starting with his original Ultimate 3S and the yet unnamed single-band, single-sideband transceiver that will sell for under $100 US. For everyone out there that believes that you have to spend the big bucks to get into amateur radio, you should know that you can build a high-performance rig today with a kit from QRP Labs. What I have learned from doing over 200 QSO Today interviews is that the novice experience where you built your own rig and operated it to make contacts is the most satisfying first ham radio experience. Hans' kits are extremely well documented and supported by Hans and his community on the QRP Labs website. It just takes a soldering iron, some basic electronic tools, and some time to build the QCX transceiver kit for under $50 to get on the air. This full-featured kit has its own test equipment built in to allow you to align and set up this rig. All of the QRP Lab products can be enhanced with additional boards and accessories to allow you to build more rig as you gain experience. If you are a new ham, or an old ham that wants a new amateur radio experience, or even want to repeat your novice experience with the latest technology, then click on the link in this week's show notes page and give QRP Labs a visit. QRP Labs is my favorite kit company. It should be yours too. And now back to my QSO Today. Do you have any ham fests or shows coming up on your calendar in the next few months?
This year I've got W4DXCC coming up at the end of September. I'm going there. W9DXCC in Chicago the week before.
What is a W4DXCC?
It's a DX convention, DX and contesting. It's held, this is about maybe 15, 16 years, something like that. They've been doing it. It's down in Pigeon Forge. It's right outside the Smoky Mountains. It's a beautiful place, very family-oriented DX convention. They really focus on fellowship and being around friends, and it's just a really good ham get-together for DXers and contesters, as is the W9DXCC one. Just some really good people that go to that convention, and it's all about DXing and contesting.
Those sound like two good events.
Yeah, I've been to both and enjoyed both of them.
Now, you've been on a number of DXpeditions. Which DXpedition was the most memorable, and how did you prepare for it?
I would have to say my first DXpedition, and that was to Gaza, Palestine. I would have to say that was the most exciting one for me because it was my first DXpedition. I'd only been in the DX Bulletin for about maybe 2 years when the possibility came up that Palestine was going to be added to the DXCC list. And a friend of mine, he encouraged me to go there and to go operate and do it on my own. Well, I had been in contact with one of the other hams there, actually two of the other hams, and I contacted them and I said, hey, I'd like to come and operate there. When word came out that I was going there, I actually found out about another DXpedition that was going there at the same time when E4 was added to the DXCC list. And I joined forces with that group, and since then I've had a lifelong friendship with those operators.
What was the most important thing that you packed for it?
What was the most important thing I packed? Well, I guess my radio.
The reason I'm asking the question is, at the time that you were in Gaza City, you weren't out in the sticks necessarily.
Right.
But if you were a desert island doing a DXpedition, have you been on any desert islands for DXpeditions?
I have not. That is one thing I have not done. I'm not really a big fan of getting to places on boats. I get seasick real easily.
All right, there's a picture of you holding on to the back of while somebody else is steering on a sailboat. You weren't looking very green then, but I understand that you don't like to set sail for the destinations. What is the most difficult DXpedition that you've gone to?
Again, I'd have to say number one, it was the first one, which was E4, it was difficult getting in. I flew into Ben Gurion Airport and then met up with my friends. But before I did, the security forces there in Israel, they were real concerned as to why I was going to where I was going, and for good reason. But it made me very nervous. But in the long run, everything worked out fine. And so, yeah, I would have to say going to Palestine was probably the most difficult one of all.
So just to put it in historical perspective, you went in 1999 or 1998?
99. I believe it was February.
Right. So you were there in February 1999. At that
Yes.
time, Gaza was still Israel, was still controlled by Israel, and Israel left Gaza in 2005. I guess I would understand that they might be concerned with the radios going into Gaza. Although I have to tell you that for people that want to fly in and out of Ben Gurion with ham radio, usually it's not an issue. So if you're coming into Israel proper, flying in and out of Ben Gurion with ham radios doesn't necessarily become a big deal.
Yeah, I'm convinced it was because of where I was going. Afterwards, how I was getting there and who I was going to meet. I'm convinced that's what it was.
What kind of impact has amateur radio had on your family life?
My family is most important, and I've learned that over the years. I didn't always treat my family as well as I should have, but I have since realized family is so, so important. But they also respect how important ham radio is to me.
Any of them become ham radio operators?
My daughter did. She is KB3JIU. She and my dad surprised me on one of my expeditions over to the United Arab Emirates. When I came back, Krista presents me with her license. She said, Pappy and I, that's my dad, Pappy and I have been studying for this behind your back, and now I have my license.
Wow, that's very cool. Is she on the air?
Not as much as I'd like her to. She doesn't have equipment, and she's very busy with school and whatnot. But in the summertime, she's a tech. In the summertime, when she does come over, I try to get her to get on the air and make some contacts.
I should get her a little DMR radio to carry around.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea.
What excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio now?
Probably, believe it or not, the FT8 mode, just because it's brand new. And there's a lot of potential behind this new digital mode.
You know, I've had a lot of people say that FT8 is the most exciting. And also a lot of people say that one of the reasons it is because you can, if you've got a band scope, you can actually see what's happening. Does your K3 also have a band scope? Do you have
it has. I have the P3, but with the software, with the sound card, you can see where all the stations are transmitting. It's wonderful to see how open the band really is.
And how do you feel as a DXer? You're not having a long QSO anyway. You're exchanging information. So does FT8 kind of feel the same way for a person who's a DXer?
Like I said, I got mixed feelings on it. You can't enjoy the QSO, if you will. You can't ask them a question. You can't tell them, hey, Frank, hope you're having a good day. You know, there's no exchange of personal information that you can do on CW or RIDI or SSB. It's basically call sign, grid square, signal report. That's it. Move on to the next guy. I assume at some point maybe they'll be able to get it to the point where you can make some other kind of exchange of information, but it's just not as personal as the other modes, I would say.
Well, it seems to me then that with that much or that little information, it would be easy to make a program that essentially you turn on the rig, push the button, and your rig's making contacts automatically on FT8 to fill the logbook of countries. Is that happening?
It is. There's at least one station doing it, probably, which means more than one are probably doing it. You know, I'm sure they set up their station. They go to work, they come back, and they see who their computer has talked to. I personally don't like the idea of it. I think an operator should be behind the keyboard making the contact.
Did you have a sense that perhaps the ARRL might change the way that awards are given? Can you work, all countries using FT8? And do you suppose that there may be a question in the future about whether or not automatic contacts qualify for awards?
I'm not sure. I don't know what will happen there. With these new technologies, it makes it hard for the awards committees to figure things out. I think that, they've had problems with remote radios, now FT8, and you're never going to solve the problem, I don't think, that where everyone's happy. Let's put it that way. As
a DXer, and if you're giving advice perhaps to new DXers, are you optimistic about the future of being a DXer?
Yeah, I think so. It seems like, we're getting some new hams, more so in Europe. They seem to be doing really well. The VK seem to be doing well. So I'm optimistic. If we just keep giving the message of what ham radio is all about, yeah, I'm optimistic about the hobby. There's lots of great things, a lot of great people involved in the hobby. Yeah, I'm optimistic.
Now, you're a professor, I think, at DX University. Does DX University, it seems to be, I know that Contest University at Dayton seems to be drawing a larger and larger crowd every year. Does DX University also do the same thing? And do you see that as a source of new DXers from the ham community?
Yeah, I think so. DX University has taken place in Visalia and Chicago and probably a couple other places. I can't think of all the other places, but yeah, I mean, there's new guys and old guys that just didn't know either about certain aspects of DXing or all of a sudden they're interested in being able to operate. They're either retired or they have a new station. It's a good outlet or a good information point for guys that want to know about DXing. Absolutely.
Do you have advice that you'd give to new or returning hams to the hobby?
Well, I guess start off the bat, make sure you log all your QSOs on your computer and you back it up.
Backup is key, isn't it?
Absolutely. You're either going to, or you already have lost your what's the saying?
This is the business I'm in. I say this to all my clients, and I've been saying it for 35 years. There's two kinds of computer users: those that back up and those who will.
Yep. And I've been in that latter situation where I lost 20,000 QSOs. Yeah, exactly. Back it up. And nowadays it's a whole lot easier. Back then it wasn't quite as easy.
Yeah, nowadays there's services like Dropbox and iDrive and things like that. Yeah, that's great advice. Bernie, I want to thank you so much for joining the QSO Today podcast. It's been a real delight to hear about DX. I don't talk about DX with too many people. I'm glad to have spoken about DX with you. And with that, I want to wish you 73.
Okay, great, Eric. It was good to talk with you. Thanks very much. And I hope you have a great rest of the day and hope to see you on the air again soon.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Bernie. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in W3UR in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of these fine sponsors by clicking on their links in the show notes pages, or when you make your purchases, that you say that you heard it here on QSO Today. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the other episodes into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page. I am grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference. QSO Today is now available on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Libsyn, and TuneIn, as well as the iTunes Store. If you own an Amazon Echo, you can say, "Alexa, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn." I still use Stitcher to listen to podcasts on my smartphone. The links to all of these services are on the show notes pages on the right side. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.